interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Welcome to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast, interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking their secrets to success. Joining us today is Rick Brawn, who is an experienced chief exec and currently an operating partner at Gen X 360. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us, Rick.
No, thank you, Alex. I'm really excited. I'm glad to have the opportunity and looking forward to a good chat.
Absolutely. Keen to hear about your journey as you've lived, on both sides of the pond from our perspective and made that bridge from what I regard as corporate blue chip into the world of private equity. So just to give us a bit of a rundown, Rick, for those listening that don't know you as well as I, just give me a kind of 60 to 90 second breakdown of yourself, please.
Sure thing. Yeah. As a U.S. citizen, really grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, going through public schools and got an affinity for aviation. So went into engineering at MIT, got an aerospace degree and joined Pratt and Whitney, an engine company, part of United Technologies Group in Hartford, Connecticut, where they really, got me to blossom out of my engineering days and got me into manufacturing and management, paid for my master's degree in engineering. And then it came to a tipping point, Alex, where I got accepted to Harvard Business School to get my MBA. And they actually sponsored me for that, which was a big deal. So I was very loyal to the company, stayed with them for 17 years, moved around the world, 6 different countries with a wife and 4 children in tow. And then ended up going to a competitor in Royce over in your neck of the woods. And that's, I think, how we started to get to know one another. Spent 6 years with Rolls and then really spent a short time in Scotland with a pump manufacturer before joining Gen X 360 nearly 5 years ago. I can't believe it's gone by that quick as an operating partner at Gen X 360 based down in Florida.
I appreciate the rundown. What one mistake do you see private equity firms or portfolio companies making?
Yeah, if we get right into it, I could probably talk more to the portfolio companies as I've not really worked very long in private equity and nonetheless any other PE firms. And I'd say the one that sticks out the most is not really understanding the investment thesis that the PE shop puts together as they're doing the due diligence on a portfolio company. So I'll explain a bit more on that. Many times a private equity shop will do a lot of due diligence to most people think to make sure we get the right price. And that's, of course, part of the deal. But when you're looking at it from the management team in a portfolio company, Alex, they underestimate how we're actually building a thesis to determine how we're going to create value with that company that we're about to buy. And I've learned that it's important for us to start sharing that with management teams that don't automatically ask. And many of the companies we buy are first time in private equity, so they miss that boat a lot.
Makes sense. So if you were being acquired by a PE firm, what as a chief exec and understanding that, what advice would you give them to start looking into and asking the right questions or doing their own due diligence for them to make sure that they're A, working with the right firm and B, fully understanding how that firm operates and what their plans are?
Yeah, if it's a chief exec, Alex, that's kind of been there, done that, and has had experience in other private equity backed portfolio companies, clearly they know what to do. But for those that are maybe first time going to work for a PE firm as a C-suite leader in a portfolio company, my advice would be, number one, ask the investment partner or operating partner about that investment thesis. It's very open book and okay to say, well, what were the things you saw in this company that would allow you to create value? And that's a great way to start the dialogue. Also, understanding the style that the PE firm will work with that portfolio company. Some are very hands-off, and they'll say, look, we're just going to kind of let you run the show here, and we'll have a quarterly board meeting. Others are much more hands-on, and they like to see a lot more data. And then you could ask, well, which data do you like to see? How often? And lastly, I would say the other big thing to learn about is, what's the timing? Some family offices will have a 5, 8, 10-year hold period. Many PE shops will say no, or PE firms will say, I really want to have a 5 to 6 year period. Others will say, 3. So understanding that timing as well to prepare the company for exit and what's necessary to reach the goals to be able to exit the company at the level that the firm wants to.
All makes sense and great advice. And for those, so the operating partners, I think originated in the most part in the States, has been built up with more and more PE firms now utilizing that resource within their firm. In the UK, Europe, we probably more so refer to it as a kind of portfolio manager, portfolio director, but there's still very much a hybrid role where the deal partner is still heavily involved in the portfolio, as I know there probably will be with Gen X, but you're more of that. In fact, without me explaining it, how would you define the kind of term and role of an operating partner?
Sure. You're right. I think it's more popular in the States, Alex, than elsewhere from what I've heard and read. And in the US, the operating partner can take very different roles. So let me just give 2 examples. In some cases, the PE firm will have an operating partner be full-time dedicated to a single portfolio company, sometimes take a full-time role as a C-suite leader and really get involved in the day-to-day operations and running the business. And other cases, they could be much less involved, where they are just touching base with the C-suite leadership team, maybe on a monthly basis, and really just trying to give guidance, strategic direction, and sometimes just be a sounding board there. Sometimes a CEO or C-suite leader just needs somebody they can talk to about some of the challenges they're having in the portfolio company. So we're kind of in the middle. Gen X 360 Capital Partners is more in the middle. We are pretty hands-on with understanding how the company is performing, but we don't get involved. And certainly I don't get involved, and neither do my peers, Alex, in running any part of the companies. And we'll cover anywhere from 4 to 5 portfolio companies at a time. So clearly we don't have that kind of bandwidth to be involved every day with running a single company. And then the incentive structures obviously can be a big difference as well from one private equity company to another in terms of how that operating partner is rewarded and how they spend their time as well.
Absolutely. And you spoke obviously about that portfolio management side and your active nature. I think a lot of people expect that. How much are you involved actually with the deal process when we're looking, when Gen X 360 are looking at an acquisition? How much of involvement do you have in that initial process?
It's a great question. And so that's another good point, Alex, that PE firms can differ quite a lot. An example I know of in another PE firm, the operating partners don't get involved until the deal is closed, and then they start to get introduced to the management team. Not my experience at Gen X 360, where we get involved right once the deal is identified. So we have a committee called a New Deal Review Committee. It's a small team of 3 people that look at incoming opportunities and assess whether we want to put a team on it. Once it passes and we want to proceed on an acquisition, we form a team which an investment partner and an operating partner are both on it from day one. So once you get the SIM, the confidential information memorandum, and you start to have your first calls with the management team, the operating partner at Gen X 360 is involved right from the beginning, which really helps quite a lot in my book to make that transition if the acquisition were to close, so that the operating partner can really be closer to the management team upon close, because that's really where the heavy lifting starts. I'd say I spend less than 10% of my time sourcing for deals. I'll spend probably about 15 to 20% of my time doing due diligence prior to close, maybe 30%. As the deals come closer to actually closing, we get very involved. But then the remainder of my time, more than half, is really spent once the deal closes on having a kickoff meeting, putting in the 90-day plan, working closely with the CEO and helping them transition into a private equity backed company if that's the first time for that company.
Okay, and you're talking about the transition there from going in, and I know you guys work a lot with kind of founder-owned, CEO-owned, and making that transition from first-time private equities, as the phrase is termed. How did you find the transition from being leading a business, but working in, I know the pump valve manufacturer you worked in, I think is backed by private equity, but previously with Rolls, how did you make that transition from being a executive leader through to being an operating partner?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because my path is very, I believe, quite unique. In fact, Alex, that point you made when I was in Scotland working for the pump manufacturer, it was another FTSE 100 public company, quite a large company like Rolls-Royce and United Technologies. So, in fact, I never had worked for any private equity-backed company before joining GenX 360. So you may ask, well, wow, how did that happen? Why did they bring you in? Pretty natural question. One, first of all, they were short on having operating partners. So there was definitely a need in the firm for a fourth operating partner at the time. This is 5 years ago. And then secondly, I think when I expressed my background at United Technologies, and to a degree as well in the UK, they realized I had not been really working for a large corporation in the head office. I was always parachuted in remote locations to run the companies they acquired. So let me take just a moment to kind of expand on that, Alex. I have done 5 roles where either United Technologies or Rolls-Royce or the Weir Group would say, Rick, we just acquired a company. It could be anywhere from 30 million to 300 million and bigger. And it would be anywhere from China, Singapore, Norway, the UK, Spain. I'd like you to go run it. And so I was never really involved with the deal process, Alex, up front, but I came in as let's say, the president of the company, and they would ask me to integrate it and put in the operating system that we're accustomed to in a public company and really professionalize the company. But yet they had very strong, rich history and a strong secret sauce that made that company attractive. And it's why UTC bought them. So I had to learn quickly how not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you follow me, but yet make the changes needed to bring them up to speed because their margins were low. They weren't moving as quick as they could. They weren't capturing as much market share as they could. So it was really interesting doing that almost half a dozen times. Is very, very relevant to what a CEO does in a PE-backed company, right? They're coming in and taking typically a family-owned and operated business and trying to bring it to that next level that a PE firm would expect. So I had this natural knack of relating to the CEO's challenges, and I think it allowed me to be, as successful as I have been at GenX to be able to help these portfolio companies grow and adapt to the PE firms, methods and strategies, and being able to make that transition is not always easy. So I think that's why I was able to make the transition fairly well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I speak to a lot of people, and depending on the PE firm, depends on their requirement. But I think most people that I would speak to would say that you need a private equity background to get into private equity, which, again, everyone always asks me, well, how do you get experience before you get in? And, there's different answers to that. But at the end of the day, you've got to be in it. So it's interesting and great to hear that, somebody who's had that kind of similar experience, and hopefully anybody who's listening is going to believe in themselves now that if you wanted to be an operating partner, you want to be a chief exec of a private equity firm, you don't have to have that level of experience. You've just got to have gained the experience required to be in that environment. Fortunately, you probably didn't know at the time that you were generating that type of experience, but it just kind of waylaid that right. Was exactly the type of experience that a PE firm needed. And therefore, when that opportunity came knocking, it certainly obviously grabbed it with 2 hands. And 5 years later, we're driving multiple businesses within the Gen X 360 portfolio.
There was a lot of learning, though. I do have to add that I really did not know much about private equity 5 years ago. And so I also had to humble myself quite a lot, almost put myself in the shoes of a student. And I spent really the first 6 months under the wings of one of our founders. He's a natural coach and mentor and just really helped me understand a lot of the ways that like a leverage buyout model works, and how much, what is leverage, how much leverage you can put on a manufacturing company, why is leverage bad in some cases. So I was confident enough, Alex, to be able to ask a lot of the dumb questions, but it helped me learn pretty quickly, coming in fresh and not having that PE background. So that's the only other advice I would give as you're coming in, to really be a student, humble yourself, learn a lot, ask the dumb questions, and really gain as much information and learn as much as you can. Sometimes it helps too, talking to people in your contacts, your networks. I actually reached out to a former colleague, Alex, that taught me a lot before and as I was joining Gen X 360. And he was very helpful in me making that transition as well.
Yeah, it's a difficult one trying to learn. I mean, I can't remember who I was speaking with regards to their recommendations. I think it was actually a gentleman by the name of Charlie Rossetti who made the transition actually from the US to the UK. And we were speaking about various different ways of learning about the private equity industry. And there's not a great deal, we've got Barbarians at the Gate. I think there's the Private Equity Guide with regards to books on there. But if you wanted to really learn what really operates and how things work, it is a bit of a secret out there, to be honest. And we had a look into a lot of things, try and find that out. But I think you've got it, hit it the nail on the head. You've just got to speak to the people who are open to sharing, and good coaches and good mentors, and getting as much information as you can to understand their world, how it operates, because it is very different. A lot of people tell me, no, it's exactly the same as running a public listed, privately owned business. There's fundamental differences, huge fundamental differences. Businesses in public listed are not quadrupling their revenue in 4 to 5 years and then doing it again in another 4 to 5 years if it remains within private equity. That's not happening. It's all about shareholder value to a certain extent. And in privately owned businesses, it's too sleepy. It's too slow. There's not enough change. It's lifestyle businesses in some parts. And I know this discredits some companies. We're not private equity backed ourselves. But there's not that mentality, and it's a different world.
Yeah. And I think that's what motivates me the most, Alex, just listening to you now, is like the improvement side and making things better and helping people learn something new is what really makes me tick on this kind of stuff, to show them, hey, there's a better mousetrap. Here's a better way to grow the business. And everybody wins too, because we're all incentivized on the same way as the company grows. So I enjoy that a lot. Obviously, not everybody can make the transition. And personally, I had to go through a lot of soul searching on adapting to this new way. And it's still something that I feel like I'm new at. And I don't describe myself as a private equity guy, even though I've been at it now for nearly 5 years, because I'm more of an operator that spent 25 plus years in aviation running businesses around the world. So it's been a lot of fun. It is exciting. It is dynamic, and it's fast. I do like that angle as well.
Good. And you mentioned obviously that challenge initially from that transition into the operating partner role. Is there any other major or big challenges that you've faced as an operating partner?
I think the other big one is, if a person comes in similar to my background, which is an operator, then you're naturally going to be paired up with people who have zero or very little common ground with yourself. So typically the investment team, made up of, let's say, an investment partner or a managing partner, are typically guys that come from consulting or banking, and they've never run businesses. So having the ability to really kind of, again, put yourself down and say, well, I have a lot to learn from that investment partner. I've never worked in banking or consulting, so let me see what he or she thinks. It could really be a great diverse team as long as there's good, respect, a healthy degree of respect for each other. And that's why I really like Gen X 360 so much, is there is a very healthy balance between the operations team and the investment team. And they are comfortable with challenging one another to learn from one another, come in at different angles and perspectives to really get the most out of an acquisition and the deal and creating value. So you have to get used to that. You have to be comfortable with surrounding yourself with people who are not similar background as your own. But I welcome that. I find that refreshing.
Okay. And what advice would you give somebody who's looking to make that transition to an operating partner role? It's a question I get asked regularly. What advice would you give them to help them make that transition?
Good question. I think a couple of things. A lot of people, like you mentioned earlier, say, well, how do I get private equity experience if I've never had it? A lot of standard answers out there are, looking at deals and seeing if you could bring a deal to a firm, but that's not easy. If you're coming in then without a deal, the angle is how do you create value for that PE firm by helping them grow a portfolio-backed a PE-backed portfolio company. So having that kind of experience with small businesses helps a lot, at least from my perspective. Being able to relate well to others. The biggest challenge I have, Alex said differently, excuse me, is being able to build trust quickly with the management team in a portfolio company, right? And it has to be natural. You can't force it. But the quicker you build that rapport, the quicker you could actually help that team. And they start to trust you and ask you questions, which will then help create value for them. You could work together better to develop the strategic objectives and how they're going to be executed. So that's the best advice I would give, is having that adaptability and ability to work well with others, build trust quickly, and working for small businesses. Because when you can say, I've really walked a mile in your shoes and I've kind of been there, that goes a long way with having that credibility with the CEO of a $50 million company, because you've kind of been there.
I think it's an interesting one. I think a lot of operating partners that I speak to that have recently made the move, I think one of their things that they find really difficult is making that transition from running a show to then basically being a coach. And that transition is massive.
True.
Because they lose, I've spoken with them. I'm frustrated. They won't deliver on the things I'm suggesting. They won't do this. I've done this before and he won't do it. It's a brand new CEO, no private equity experience, not listening to me. And I think that initially comes back to that point of it's building that rapport and spending that time in those initial phases, rather than just running in and going, I know everything, I'm the operating partner, and taking over. As you mentioned, you can't run 6 different businesses as a chief exec. It's very much operating in those different levels, supporting, guiding, mentoring, coaching, and wearing the relevant hat that you need to wear at that time. And I'm sure there's times you've had to roll your sleeves up and dive in when crisis is hit. But in the most part, you're there to support, not there to do. Did you find that difficult maybe in the early phases of operating?
You bring up, you got me thinking of 2 comments before I go there. Is one is if a person is running a business and wants to become an operating partner, to your point, Alex, they also need to be very self-aware. And so one of the reasons I think I got the job too was I talked on my interview with my boss about emotional intelligence, and we really had a great direct, heart-to-heart chat on our first or second interview. And it was about just knowing that I'm comfortable letting go of being the top dog and having people up to me and decisions and stuff like that, to more, like you said, more of a business partner that's more of a coach, mentor to someone else. So you got to first do a little soul searching if you're going to make that transition to an operating partner. But secondly, here's an interesting story, Alex, you may not know. When I first joined Gen X 360, my boss and the founder were very, very helpful. And early on, I think I was 6 months in the firm, they told me, Rick, why don't you fly up to New Jersey and just go out to dinner with the CEO? Don't talk shop and just get to know the guy and come back. And it was really awkward for me, if I'm honest. Initially, I thought, okay, so we're going to spend company money. I'm going to fly up to New York, have a lovely dinner, maybe a glass of wine, and get to know the guy and just fly back home. Is that really it? But yet that taught me so much about that whole point of building trust and credibility. And honest to God, that made it so much easier to work with him. The next time I went up, he asked me to bring my wife, and I met his wife, and it just really blossomed from there. So it is about understanding that the role is quite different, making sure you're aware of yourself and being comfortable with being a partner. I like the fact, though, the advantage is then you could do that across 3, 4, 5 different companies simultaneously, and you get exposed to different industries, you get exposed to different people, different markets, different business models. Now we stick to manufacturing, so I get excited, Alex, about, wow, I'm learning more about continuous manufacturing in a blow molding business versus, aerospace manufacturing. So there are things you gain while you might give up the CEO job and being the top man on the, totem pole. So it's good pluses and minuses, but I could answer that other question if you just remind me, please, about what it might
No,
have
that's
been.
okay. So it was about that transition. Was there a big urge for you to jump in both hands? I want to get back to my CEO hat. Did you struggle with that?
No, I did not. I really humbled myself and said, man, I don't know anything about private equity. I got to be a student, learn the basics from these analysts. I talked to everybody in the firm. It's a small firm, and then really learned a lot from the deal partners about, how do they look at acquisitions and how does a leverage buyout model work, and really understanding their perspective. So I still felt very excited because I was learning so much. For me, it's being in a challenging situation where I don't know something. And many people are like that, even CEOs who enjoy the challenge of doing another CEO role. When you dive in, Alex, and you ask them, well, why do you want to do that job? It's because it's difficult, it's new, it's different, it's challenging. And that's the way I felt coming into the private equity world, not having any background in PE.
So looking at when you're working, and now you'll have worked with multiple chief execs, CFOs, no doubt they're learning from you, you're learning from them. Everyone gets that benefit of experience and develops that. What are the 3 attributes that you believe make a top performing executive?
Just to clarify, on the portfolio company side, the chief executive or CFO, what are the attributes that make them successful? Got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, not having the ego. There have been many great CEOs, but unfortunately had too big of a chip on their shoulder, and it led them to not work well with the entire deal team in the private equity firm. So that's the investment partner and the operating partner and the analyst, and that's a shame because they have a lot to offer if they could just sometimes lower the ego a bit. The second one is I've seen that adaptability, that ability to really go from founder owned and operated company to a different world. It could be private equity, it could be public, but having adaptability to be able to say, wow, I'm going to have to change a lot, learn a lot, get a lot, being open to that ability to change and being used to it. So unfortunately, some of the people who were not able to make that transition, Alex, were those that maybe only grew up for 25 years in a single company. And that's unfortunate because they haven't had to change before or adapt. And so when it happens, they're not used to it, and they haven't been able to make that transition. I think the third one, just the attribute of building a team. I think those C-suite leaders that have been successful the most have been the ones to build a team around them time and time again, because they may not be the expert in that industry. They may not be an inch wide, a mile deep in a technical area, but that's not as important as being able to be aware of, hey, I have a gap in the organization here. I need some talent. I know how to get that talent and really make them part of this team, and building the A team, the successful winning team, is really what it's all about. And those C-suite leaders that do that, even CFOs that do it, COOs or chief commercial officers, they can build their commercial team to be the A team, generally win in this game very well.
Yeah, and I think that building of the all very valid points, but the building of the team is the tough one. I think from a lot of guys that I speak to, getting the right people on, getting the right boots on the ground. I think one thing I see, and it'd be interesting if you see this as well, is a lot of the chief execs that first time PE. They've made an acquisition. The PE firm Gen X 360's made an acquisition, for example. You're keeping that chief exec, and maybe they were the founder or they bought the business or whatever else. I think one of the hard transitions a lot of those chief execs find is the finance side of things. I think that in a lot of small businesses that haven't had that private equity world, the finance has always been a little bit of probably not the most focused on area other than cash in the bank, but bringing in a fully fledged chief financial officer and not handing over because you don't relinquish responsibility, but bringing in the true expert. I find a lot of chief execs find that difficult on why they need a fully fledged CFO if they've not had one before, and how.
No, that's right. That's exactly right.
Responsibility. You're not having a business.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And funny you mention it, because those that are aware of it and they say, I know I need a CFO, Rick, I haven't had that experience, they'll typically ask me, okay, help me find the right CFO. You know me, we've got enough rapport and trust. Bring some candidates. So I'll help bring CFO candidates that I think will work well with that chief exec, Alex. And then, generally let them pick the one that they're going to work best with. But then the next step is how they partner and truly, like you started to talk about, not relinquish, but partner with that CFO, because they do have to empower them. They do relinquish some responsibility and accountability. That's why they're paying this CFO to do the job. But it's that partnership of how they could really work together better to decide, do we go in this direction? Do we put resources here? And when you have a true partner, you could bounce those important decisions by. That's really, really helpful. It makes my job a lot easier too, because as an operating partner, now you've got two chief or C-suite leaders that are going to work well together. They start to take on those areas that sometimes I would be involved with. So it's really good when you have the team that works well together.
No, absolutely. And I think I see that as a big challenge as a firm. I won't mention who, but there's a firm I'm working with at the moment that's got that particular issue. Brand new business, just acquired. Chief exec, why do I need a CFO? And they're trying to manage that at the moment. But I see it as a key issue. Won't be the first, and isn't the first, and it certainly won't be the last. What's curious, what do you love about private equity? And subsequently, what do you, if hate's too much of a strong word, what do you dislike?
I love the diversity of the business models that I learn about and the people that I come across. So meeting these founders, and sometimes they're not founders. They could be a chief exec, Alex, that actually came from another PE shop, because many times a Gen X 360 and many other PE firms will buy a portfolio company from another PE firm. So they've had a bite at the apple previously, and so learning from them is great. But the business models I really enjoy learning about in different industries, because I've been so focused in aviation, that's what kind of I enjoy the most. And as I mentioned earlier, helping that person just makes me feel better that I'm actually assisting that leader in ways they needed help, and making that business stronger, better, because one of the reasons that I enjoyed being a chief exec in the past was that making businesses better, I knew was best for my team and the people boots on the ground. Well, I'm less involved now, but I still feel by influencing the chief exec and the C-suite team and making that company move in the right direction will help everybody in that company. and maybe have a bonus at the end of the year and a little more money in the pocket. That really floats my boat, and I get excited about that. What do I not like as much? Sometimes private equity has a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of people. I learned early on that I didn't know some people really despise private equity because of kind of the pretty woman, Richard Gere kind of picture comes into their head, where we're going to buy this company and chop it up and sell it for pieces and just walk away with a boatload of money, and we don't care about the people or the business. And I bump into that sometimes, which I'm still not used to, if I'm honest. And it kind of makes me come down a little bit, because I'm like, no, that's not really what it's like these days, especially with the ability to bring technology into companies and enable them to be better, stronger, faster. So that's a little bit of a downer from my side, that I have to sometimes pause, self-reflect, help maybe share more information with that person, but also appreciate their view, because maybe they did come from a perspective that they got cut from a private equity firm that bought them. And that does happen at times. So that's a little bit of the, I guess, negative thing I don't like as much about PE.
Yeah, great. And I hear that, especially when if we're doing a particular search and it's, one of the rare times where they actually want somebody outside of private equity, which I will admit is not often, but we will speak to people, and even, people that I come across just generally asking what I do, and private equity recruitment, and they're like, okay, isn't that awful? Don't they just buy a business, strip it out for parts, asset sell it, and then everyone loses their jobs? And of course, within any industry, there's good and there's bad, but
Right.
Well, I've not ever come across a business where it's okay, we're buying it for an asset strip, and we're just going to sell off all its components. I mean, arguably I do deal in the lower middle market, so there's not a lot of options for that anyway. But I agree, there's a bit of animosity towards that, and I think there's some of that is justified, certainly with history. KKR got a lot of bad rap because of Toys R Us, and how that kind of was handled. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but they made some fundamental bad decisions. One of which being the internet was a bit of a fad. But I think in the very most part, private equity firms are there to build. They're there to grow businesses. They incredibly enhance the local economies, hiring. They're always bringing new people. You don't quadruple the revenue of a business by literally just keeping headcount and stripping it back. You can't, although I'm sure everyone would like that. But you just possibly can't. You need to bring in people, you upskill people, develop people, and people progress in their careers. So I do agree it offers a huge amount, but also there is that element where maybe it's not been as positive previously. So how about your influences? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen? Where do you get your, you've obviously mentioned education from others in the founder of Gen X 360, but what is it that keeps you current and keeps you up to date?
Yeah, I try to keep the sharp saw, as I like to say. I've been reading a lot more on just developing better habits to kind of continue to keep myself pressing forward, learning more, developing myself to maybe move up in the firm. So whether it's a Brendan Bouchard on successful habits or podcasts, I tend to listen to them while I'm going for a run. Keeping myself fit has been important, given all the stress that we're all feeling with COVID, not being able to get out much. That's really helped me keep things in check, Alex. And lastly, just maintaining those relationships. I've certainly grown over the years to value those relationships much more so than when I was younger. So I spend a lot of time just really keeping in touch with people that I haven't done in the past as well. And it's funny, sometimes, Alex, those relationships actually help me in ways that I never would have thought of in my current day-to-day challenges or on the job. So it's really helpful, though. I think with COVID, hopefully that'll pass sooner than later. People can, not feel as stressed out or worried. But keeping that balance, I think a lot about mental and physical and emotional health a lot. And keeping that balance is really important. So I spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, the old phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Definitely
Yeah,
be apparent. And I can imagine in your role when you need a bit of guidance, you can't be the knowing absolutely everything, nor you can open some doors, and those old connections will always be warm and forthcoming if you give back to them and you keep in touch over the years.
exactly. And it's funny too. My boss and I were talking the other day. Um, when a lot of people are stuck at home, they do find themselves maybe with a little bit more time, if they're fortunate, then keeping yourself on a hobby or a sport of some type you can do at home helps a lot because it just tries to re-engage your brain and your body in a different way. And keeping that balance, I think, is the key to success in whatever you're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And have you ever been, whether it's now or previously in your career, ever been kind of blindsided? And what did you learn from it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that are not blindsided or haven't failed are either lying or just haven't really been there. Um, yeah, one comes to mind actually quite vividly a few years ago when we bought a company, and I did not, I underestimated, Alex, that the CEO was quite threatened by me, and I didn't
Okay.
understand why or how. So having a little bit more of that social awareness was something I really picked up on then, because I thought we were being able to discuss some strategic changes in the company with him, but he quite subtly took offense. And I found myself in a position of apologizing to him and saying, "Look, I didn't know. I offended you. I'm sorry. I was just trying to help think about the business with you." And it kind of recalibrated my thinking on being a little bit more socially aware of how others are perceiving me. Because, yeah, operating partners do come in and take over the CEO's job in many cases or some cases. So I have to be a little bit more aware of that. And it was certainly a good learning point for me going forward as I continue to develop in my role. So it was a good experience, but certainly one I built upon.
I suppose it's like anything that anybody could have a scenario like that, especially as you get more into your role and your opportunity, and are probably more aware of that at the start. But then you kind of like, right, another deal. Let's get in. Let's do this. Let's do that, and you kind of forget about the that person. This is all brand new. You've
Spot
done it
on.
5, 6 times, and
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, I've not done this before, and I don't know what you're coming in here for. Am I going to get replaced? Am I going to lose my job? Are you actually trying to help me? Are you trying to understand what's going on in the business? This is all different. And yeah, when you've done it 4 or 5 times, you've kind of become accustomed. Whereas everything is brand new potentially for that chief executive, got
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
prior experience. And even if they have, you never know what their previous experience was. Operating partner came in, tried to run the business previously or whatever else. So I think it's Tony Robbins that always talks a lot about that building rapport stage as the first step is
Absolutely.
learning their story
You
and
can't
really
rush it.
where they are.
Yeah, that's right. You can't rush or push that building rapport stage. Absolutely. And that's probably what I was doing is I just thought, okay, we're good. Let's move on. Not
On to
yet.
the next one. Not got there yet. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self, Rick?
Great question. One I haven't heard of. Um, uh, not be as selfish. I was quite selfish and self-centered, quite focused on my career. And clearly, you got the pluses and minuses with everything because back then I think I would have learned even more from others if I had just opened myself up more to spending time with um, the right relationships. That's the hard part. You always have people around you, Alex, that some are just fun to be around. Some could be pulling you away from what you really should be doing. Others can really help you and build you. So finding the right people and spending more time with them is really what I would have told my 20-year-old self. And it would have helped me even more than where I am today. It's certainly something I have learned now and spend more time doing today. But yeah, that's a great question. I was a very focused young man on my career at Pratt and Whitney, and wanted to really become. Genuinely, I wanted to be the president of Pratt and Whitney, which is a tall order. I never came even close to it. Yeah, but nonetheless, I had that kind of ambition. And yeah, it helped me to some degree, but I think a little bit more balance on that would have gone a long way.
Great, and I think that would definitely be something for for myself as well. Being able to listen to others more, understand where they're coming from. Again, building rapport, understanding their story, and when you're young, you focus on your goal, and nothing else nothing stands in the way, and everything else is just noise. And sometimes you miss some of the certainly vital parts. So Rick, if somebody wanted to reach out to you on past this podcast, they've been listening in today, and they've got a question, or maybe there's a business that they're selling, or something with regards to Gen X 360, how would they best get in touch with you?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, our website has our V card on it, so the genx360.com website. Otherwise, my LinkedIn profile has also got my email on there to reach out to me or send me a message. But I would be more than happy to help anyone looking into the industry, or maybe they're already in private equity and struggling, or in a portfolio company and struggling. I always enjoy helping others, Alex. So welcome the opportunity to contact them.
Perfect, and we'll put the links both in the show notes for anybody that wants to find that. Rather than, although you can, if you're watching, you can see how to spell Gen X 360. But if you're not, like I did when I first started, you will end up getting it wrong. So we will put that in the show notes, and I think it's .biz as well. I don't think it's.
.com or .biz, and it is a funny name. I could explain for 2 seconds that we wanted to be next generation private equity. Okay. that was already taken. So we flipped it around and said, okay, generation next, and abbreviated it, coming from the 3 founders that were GE, 1 founder from investment bankers. So the 4 rings you see on the icon on the corner of our company name is really those 4 founders. It's been a great company, and unique background. Having 3 people coming from GE who used to work for Jack Welch is quite special as well. So
yeah, I know the pains of naming a business. I was set on raw talent until I Googled it, and then realized there's Alan Sugar, who's obviously Donald Trump did The Apprentice. Well, you'll know that, actually, to be fair, with spending time over here. So yeah, he invested in a business, and they called it Raw Talent Academy. So that was out the window, and then eventually settled on Raw Selection from there. So I know the pain of trying to find a business, setting yourself, I finally got it. Let's just move on and let's get going. And then it's taken. And you've got to come up with all these ideas, and then you've got to go for it again. But that's great. So, well, look, thank you very much for joining us, Rick. I really appreciate your insight. It's been great.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me, Alex. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So, as always, thank you very much to our listeners for joining us. And of course, should you ever need support with private equity professionals or portfolio executive hiring, please do reach out to me at Raw Selection. But till the next time, keep smashing it, and we'll speak to you all again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.